deeper. One of the first questions I talked to when I interviewed Don for this talk was what color tractor, and Don, I think your answer was green.
Generally.
Your green tractor operation. And I asked Don, what's the average age of your orchard? And Don didn't answer me. And Don says, you have to understand, I'm 62. And then I didn't know Don before our conversation, and I'm thinking, does this mean that Don doesn't want to tell me what the average age is, or that he's not going to change his orchard? And then he said, you have to understand that I didn't get all new orchard, but we're in a system of constant renewal. And so I think you gave me, Don, an average age of 12 to 14 years, but you said that you were in a system of renewal where you were looking at systems that were in the 10 to 12 foot row spacing, 1,400 trees per acre. Is that generally explain your system? Okay, we'll pick on you a little bit later since you're our expert here, since you're the furthest from home. It's the least easy for people to check on what you do, and so you can say darn near anything and know that most of these people will never check you out. Does that give you comfort, Don?
Well, the truth of the matter is I have some fellow employees in the audience as well as distant relatives and people we work with, so
okay.
Probably got to keep myself in check a little bit if I lying.
Down at the end of the table we have John Verbrugge, Valley Fruit, tractor color, mixed guy, blue going to orange. And I'm asking this question at the beginning so that I can understand these guys a little bit, but whatever a person's decision, it has come about over a series of smaller decisions because of things they've experienced. And this is part of capital decisions that we all do. Maybe we get to different answers, but they're for certain reasons. Maybe we like a vendor, our access is there. John's average orchard age, he told me, was 15 plus years, but they were planting most of their orchards now on a 12-foot or 12-foot V system. Did I get that right, John?
Yes.
Okay. I'll come back to you in just a minute. Jerry. Jerry Haak is in the valley known as one of the Outlook boys. And that's because Jerry kind of farms in a small town area in between two larger cities with several people in your group. Some partners and some people you work with. Right. Tractor color, orange. Okay. And average age of tree. I got it down here on the paper, less than 10.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Is it less than 7?
It's real close to 7.
Okay. So, would you explain your system to us just a little bit, Jerry? You defined your system when we talked as a capital as needed system. And with your average tree age of 7 years old, that means you've got a lot of young trees. So you're looking at this capital usage as a system from the beginning. So from the day you buy the piece of property, what happens here in a brief?
Well, briefly, what we try to do is get into production as fast as we can. And one of the ways we do that is, and since this is a capital question, we typically grow our own trees in place. And by using bench grafts or sleeping ice, we're able to put the trees right down the row. And by not having to dig them up, I have found out that you can actually gain a year in growth and getting up to the top of the canopy. And what we end up doing on our ranch is a lot of it is looking at what Apple Fruit does, their advantage. And they've been doing that for years. And it's always amazed me when I go there that they can get a bench graft or a sleeping eye to fill the canopy space in 2 years. And that's our goal. So that's a place that we learn a lot of our processes from, and so that capital investment that we make with those sleeping guys or bench grass is a lot less than buying a nursery tree. So that's one thing we do. The other thing is that I've been planting a V trellis since the mid-'80s, and typically have been pretty well sticking with the same planting spacing. We're at 12 feet down the row, and depending on the variety, we're anywhere from a foot to 32 inches down the row and 12 feet between the rows. So it's very uniform. It's what we've been doing for a long time, so the employees know all the problems with the trellises. We've learned how to not let the trellises fall over, even though this year we had a couple close calls. But all those things is part of our system in order to maximize production. And I think the new level of production that we all have to get to on most varieties is now 95 to 115 bins an acre. So if you're planning a system, you better have it figured out how you're going to accomplish that objective.
Okay, so if I were to ask the question just for a quick rebuttal here, you would say that you've adapted your farming system so that you can mechanize it.
Well,
versus the other way around, adapting the mechanization to fit what you want to do for farming.
Well, you asked that question, and I would say 5 years ago, I was on the side that said that I will plant my orchard around the technology to make the technology work. And I've now switched. I don't believe that anymore. I think production has to trump technology. When you're picking 70 bins an acre, and then you jump up to 105 to 110, your cost per unit goes down more than what technology is going to save you in cost. So I'm now on the side that would say production has to trump technology, and technology is going to have to figure out how to make it work in my system that's producing 100 bins an acre. I don't want to go back using the technology and go back to 70 bins an acre. So if there's a new system that can use technology and meet my criteria of 100 to 110 bins an acre, I'm all over it.
I think, Don, when we first talked, you said you were budgeting 60 bins per acre. Are you guys seeing yields higher than that, or are you thinking that's the top that your systems have to operate under?
No, we've picked substantially more than that, and look to, probably won't hit Jerry's levels, probably just aren't that capable, but I guess I agree with Jerry's analysis in total. I mean, it's, to a certain extent, we got to do things as cost effectively as we possibly can, but the real strategy, I think, that should drive our business is profit maximization. And generally, those two are somewhat mutually exclusive. And I think you got to design a system for the maximum pack boxes per acre, and that should be the driver of your business.
So I see a little bit of a dilemma here. So if we're talking about 80 to 100 bins per acre, I see some difficulty in the harvest systems that we just talked about, because even if we pick those and we're doing 40 bins to the acre, that means, or 50 bins to the acre, that means those bins are stacked in that row so tight that you can barely walk between them. So I guess I'm going to go to John a little bit, give him a chance to weigh in here a little bit. Do you see in your operation platforms moving into these types of systems?
Yeah, I always do. I mean, we've been experimenting with platforms. My dad's been doing it since when I was a little kid. I was climbing around on a platform he had, and it's now in the junkyard. We've implemented different kinds of platforms, and we're always looking at technology to pay its way. I'm not the kind that'll just implement something because it looks neat. I do like them, but it's got to pay its way. And I agree with Jerry that that technology and where we're going with these platforms, what we just saw in the meeting before, I believe is going to as long as they can adapt and change, because our systems are adapting and changing based on the economics that surround us, that changes everything we do.
So again, a little bit of full disclosure, I don't have one of those blocks that does 105. I don't have one that does 80. But from a competitive standpoint, I feel that you're in a way better position, Jerry, than I am on these varieties and your unit cards.
Well, part of the process of increasing your production, and let me just step back. 7, 8, 9 years ago, I bought a couple platforms, and I had 4 gentlemen pruning about 300 acres of orchard just from the top of that platform, and then we would have crews go down and do the bottom. And as we went from that 75 to 100 bins an acre, we realized we had to change our pruning, and we had to be a lot more accurate, to the point where we're counting buds, much like the grape growers do, per tree or per liter. And we have targets now that we want to have on each block on how many buds per tree we want to have. Well, when you put people on a platform, it's a lot more difficult to get the uniformity needed in pruning to get to that level of 100 bins an acre. And what I've learned in the last 5 years is once your system is full, the canopy is full, pruning is the item that will most determine how well you have return bloom and how well you have production every year. And so our pruning cost per acre went up when we got rid of the platform, but our pruning cost per bin went down. So I'm spending more per acre to prune now than I did when I was using the platforms at a lower production level. So we're not using the platforms anymore to prune. We're using it for training. We'll use it for thinning on some of the older varieties that are under V trellises. But generally, my hours on the platform have probably dropped by 75%.
So Jerry, how do you prune then?
Well, we prune off the ladders, and if we have 1,400 trees an acre, we want about 140 buds on a tree, 160, and before pruning, a tree probably has 500 or 600, and so it's all detailed now. And while you're traveling on the ground at a self-propelled pace, it's just nearly impossible to do the level of pruning detail you need to get to that next level of production. So for the varieties that are size challenged, and we have many of those, we don't use the platform anymore.
You actually have someone that comes behind the crew,
yeah, so
checking bud count.
Right. So this is another oval thing that we've learned is buds per tree equals big apples per tree, and so another little sidetrack on that. Years ago, back in the late '80s, I tried blossom thinning on my galas to make bigger galas, and it would never work. And then when I would go to Oval, they would make it work every year. And I just came to the conclusion that it was the site. They had such a better site, and it just wasn't going to work at my place. But once you prune to the detail that Oval is and that I'm now doing, and then you blossom thin, suddenly you can grow big apples just about anywhere.
I'm going to ask you that same question in a second, John, but first I want to just back up a half a step to you, Don. A number of years ago, a number of growers had a strategic discussion, and we looked at our man hours of labor per acre and the varieties we were growing, and we said, we're just using too much labor. We're doing too much detail work. We need to go the other direction. And then along came a whole series of varieties and training systems, and I look at my numbers today, and I wish I could get back to where I was when I made the decision I should go the other way. So could you speak to that maybe just a little bit, and also to what your labor situation, are you in a spot where you can competitively draw a lot of people in if you made a decision that you needed more input, or are you driven to a system where you have to get labor efficiency through mechanization somehow?
Oh, that's a whole lot to address here. Well, first of all, on the labor front, our part of the upper Midwest, there's multiple crops, so there's a fair amount of labor around. There's a large vegetable production area in part of in one of the apple production areas in the state, and there's also hand-harvested blueberries, et cetera, and a nursery industry. So while you just can't draw on them at a moment's notice, there is, you make alliances and you pick up a labor force as you go along. So we're not horribly limited, although we're certainly concerned because it doesn't seem like there's a growing labor force out there. And you're right, we're getting a little more complicated in terms of how orchards have to be managed compared to what they were 10 years ago. So that's a definite concern, but I think it goes back to you have to put in what you have to put in order to get the outcome. While you need to look for labor savings all along the way, the ultimate goal has to be, as Jerry stated here, you've got to have a target budget number of packed bins per acre in order to make it all work. While price is king in terms of return per acre, it's still it's packed units per acre that should be the overall driver of how we go about this. So now that I've gotten lost in thought here, what was what didn't I answer?
That would be okay for a second, because you left off at one of John's favorite terms, and that's the sweet spot of production. We have to have the quality fruit, and we have to have the right amount of it per acre to make this thing work. And so now I'm going to back up to the question I asked you about subscribing to this bud pruning theory a little bit.
Yeah, we've been doing that ourselves for about 7 years, and it takes time. It's not something you just jump in one year and you think you got it all figured out, that you need 200 buds on that tree and you're set. It takes years of looking at how does that number correlate, that 200. Say if your trees come back and the guys count the trees, and you have to make sure they count the exact same trees every year. Because if you go count different trees, they get a different size tree, your numbers are all screwed up. So there's a big learning process in going through it. So you go back to the exact same 6 trees you do in every block. They come back with your numbers. We send in bud analysis. Some people do it themselves to see what % of the buds are actually fruit buds. So then you take those two numbers, you pull them together, and then you can start looking at, okay, what did last year, the year before, what did that do as far as telling me that bins per acre correlated with that percentage and that number. And the thing that throws off that I shared with Jim is size. Sometimes you think you got it figured out. It's like, I'm going to pick 80 bins the acre, and you have maybe a warm year where the fruit doesn't grow as well, and it just drops it down 10-20%, so your numbers can fluctuate. But some of our best crop estimating has been in December based on using these numbers. Better than when someone walks in the orchard, because as soon as somebody walks in the orchard, their passion and love for that fruit takes over reality. And they start looking at it and dreaming 80 bins to the acre, and it's not there. So what you want is realistic numbers. As being vertically integrated in a warehouse, we want to know as close as we can what we got.
Okay, so what does all this have to do with mechanization and automation? These are tree systems. I think it's important because what you do in one system affects what you do in another system. And so as you run a system that picks more bins, you've got different complications at harvest than a system that picks fewer bins. So what's your picking system look like, Jerry, on these? Maybe it changes a little bit by variety.
Well, yeah, it does change by variety, but I kind of what I wrote down here to reflect on this one is, if you're going to be picking 25 or 30 bins and less per pass, you're doing a color pick, you're doing an early season pick, and you're only picking a few bins per acre. We've learned that if you have crews with bin trailers, you'll spend a lot less money per bin in harvest than if you lay out the empties out in the orchard. If you're picking 25 bins an acre, in my system, you have to walk 150 feet to fill up the bin. So that's just really expensive to do. And so by trial and error, we've kind of have teams of 5 with a bin trailer, especially with our Honeycrisp. This has been working really well. We'll just train little pods of 5 guys. 1 guy will be on the tractor, 4 guys picking, but the guy in the tractor has a picking bag, and he picks, and he's in charge of the crew. And he's also responsible to transport the empty bins on the bin trailer and the full bins back to the loading area. And what we've learned is, and it still surprises me to this day, is that when that trailer is moving down the row so the guys never have to walk very far to empty their bag, their efficiency went up 40%, even though they're still using ladders. And so I've been buying more bin trailers and more tractors to handle this, and so we're doing any time we go through the block and we're picking less than 30 bins an acre, we're doing it on bin trailers. And back to the Honeycrisp scenario is, what's also amazing on that is each of those guys is making about $175 to $200 a day based on what we're paying. And when we lay out the empties, they make about $120 a day. So their efficiency's gone up, they're making more money, and my cost is actually lower than if I laid out the empties and paid a competitive rate. So that does tell you that having a machine move with the people is a good thing. I just haven't implemented the bulky machine and still use ladders. We don't have a real tall trellis, so a lot of the fruit's picked from the ground. But I think that's the other thing. The other thing that I see in a lot of orchards that we've kind of shied away from is all these systems. The wire now is about 2 feet off the ground, so if you want to get from one row to the next, you got to crawl literally on your stomach to get to the next row half the time. So we've done our training so that the first wire is about chest high, and we still can maintain production. And what that allows us to do is we can go underneath the wires pretty easily in our orchard, and that helps with this harvest management tool as well.
So you're actually harvesting 2 rows at a time, or
well,
3 rows at a time?
If we're picking an early gala pick, we might be picking 4 rows at a time into one bin trailer.
I'm thinking here too.
Okay.
Because the wire is a problem. I don't know if everyone else has it, but I sure put them in my place. And, I look at some of those wires, how low they are, and I think, gee, do I even want someone to bend over that low to pick the fruit? Probably not my biggest gain in productivity in the orchard is probably not down at that 2.5 or 3 foot level. So it sounds like if I had to classify anyone here at the table, I'd probably say that none of you would say that you were a low-cost producer. You were high-output producers. Yeah. Don's shaking his head. We almost shook it the other way for a second there.
Well, low cost on a year-on-year basis, it comes down to packed units per acre again. So,
okay, it was a trick question, Don. You got the answer right.
Okay.
Right? It's a unit.
I'm done then.
It's a unit cost, right?
Yeah.
It's a packs per
Right.
issue.
Probably nobody here is a low-cost producer per acre. That's not the goal. It's to control your cost per unit and maximize your return per unit.
Let me relate to you a situation that I think we've all found ourselves in at some time in our life. You're realizing that harvest is around the corner in the next day or so, and you realize, based on how many bins you have to pick in the next 2 weeks, how many bins you have to pick per day. And you look over at the parking lot, how many pickers you have ready to go, and that number doesn't match how many bins you have to pick in the next 2 weeks. So what's your strategy, Jerry?
Well, that's always a tough one. Well, two things. I'm intrigued with the lights. You'd have to have a different crew, obviously, running at night, but that's something that we got to look at implementing on our systems. What we generally do is, when I plant an orchard, I like to have in any one location enough varieties, whether that be cherries, pears, and apples, all the different varieties of apples. I like to have it so that we can hire a crew early in the spring and have enough work for them until the last apple is picked in November. And by doing that, the employee likes that. You're able to train a workforce much better. And a lot of times during the summer months, there's high school kids. I have a minor work permit, so we allow that. And so we're able to build up our crew pretty fast. And there's a lot of loyalty among the people that work for me that we're trying to provide near full-time employment versus hiring and firing at will. If we need them or if we don't need them, I find work for them to do. So I think I have a little bit of a competitive advantage on that compared to other orchards around that don't have that kind of a situation set up. So I have a pretty stable workforce. And during cherry season, I can attest that we have to turn many people away because they want to pick cherries and we just don't have any more spaces for them.
I thought I might get the answer of the two guys being chased by the bear, and that you were going to tell me you were just going to pay more than the guy down the road, but I don't think that's what you told me when we had our original discussion. I think you had a different solution.
Well, it goes back to another thing that you learn when you have platforms is lack of uniformity reduces efficiency. So when you have a canopy and there's spaces that are missing and trees that are missing or whatever the case may be, when you put people on a platform, you got some people not doing anything because they're going through a blank spot. And you got the other side working like crazy because it happens to be a heavy tree. So that whole lack of uniformity, and that goes also over to when you're picking a lot of bins per acre, it's not difficult to have people come to your place to work, even if the piece rate per unit is less than a neighbor that's picking the same variety, but it's on a 12 by 18 or a 20 by 20 spacing. It's incredible how the difference in piece rates can be seen 3 miles away. And so I think what it gets down to is our workers expect to make X number of dollars per day. So it's up to us farmers to figure out how many units can they get to that level. And if you're picking 100 bins an acre, it's a lot easier to get to that level than if you're picking 50 bins an acre on a 20 by 20, 12-foot ladder, and you're picking Golden Delicious. So that's the answer, is you've got to create your system so that the people will want to work there.
John?
Well, the people have to be there first. And, our industry is continuing to plant more and more of what Jerry's planting, what I'm doing. And a lot of growers are going to 80 to 100 bins to the acre, and you start calculating out what does that require. When you start producing 80 to 100 bins per acre, to get through a 20-acre block, you're starting to look at cherry. Like picking a cherry block requires 20%, 25%, or more people per acre. So when you get a larger block like that, Jerry's absolutely right. It's got to be attractive to pickers, but you have to actually have people that show up. And so you do, and the economics are out there. You do have to have a competitive advantage in pricing over everybody else around you. And if you don't, the people are very technology savvy with their cell phones when they're sitting there in your pickup and you fill out your I-9W4 and they're on the phone. The guy down the street's $1 more. After you've shown that person you'd have a job for him all the way from cherry season till November 15th, and he's seen your entire ranch, and he drives off. And you try to explain to him that, you know, you can make what you want to make that per day, and that doesn't seem to matter. It's the grass is always greener on the other side. It seems like what I run into down in the lower Yakima Valley, and I think every region, you know, Michigan probably offers some different areas that work against it or work for it, and each of us battle our different economies that we work in as Wenatchee. You know, your location, if you're off the road, it's really hard to get people. If you are right on the road and you start picking cherries, guess what? You are pushing people away. But if you're way up on a hill and people got to drive 5 miles up and there's 5 help wanted signs by the time you get to your place, guess where they're going to stop first? Not yours, where you're picking the biggest crop you've ever picked. So the people have to be there, so you have to be able to get them. And, you know, we've been doing H2A. It's just been a joy going through it, but, you know, what choice do you have?
You got little chuckles there.
Yeah, the poster child for H2A. And, but you have to look at, you know, your labor supply. What do you need? I mean, it's silly that we invest $20,000 to $30,000 an acre, and we wait for the sign on the side of the road to finish up what we've invested in. And we've got a lot of money sitting there that we've invested in. We need to pay off. You got to get that fruit picked on time. So it's important to have the people, and I think it's going to be a mix of the mechanics, the machineries coming in and working, H2A, and you know, you got H2As driving up our minimum wage. Our minimum wage in Washington's $9, but the AWAR for this last year was $12 an hour. That is our new minimum wage as an industry, is $12 an hour. That's what you're competing with when you've got everybody out there with H2A labor. So you have to be on a competitive with that price and also have the production. And other options like mechanical harvesting, I think, has got to be in the mix.
Don, I think in the last panel you made a conversation that a note that I copied down here, and that had to do with what the picker really wants. So I'm going to ask, because the picker wants money.
Well, they want more than that, but they want money. That's the sort of driving force.
Yeah, I've seen them put up with a lot for the money, and I've seen them leave a really nice workplace because they didn't get the money. So given that the pickers want money, are we setting up a situation here, kind of spinning off of John's comment, are we setting up a system here where the system we put together really isn't answering the same question, because we've got the pickers that want money, and that's not necessarily what we want. Sometimes we focus more on, we want you to color pick, and we want you to leave 50% of the fruit on the tree, and we want you to pick the bottoms, and then we want you to pick the tops, and then we want you to leave early, and we're not focusing on the things we want matching up to the things they want.
I was sitting here listening, and I was thinking, one of the big things I see that we all have a tendency to do because we're in business, and maybe it's a nature of people, but we oftentimes are penny wise and dollar foolish in the way we deal with labor, and you know, we got to recognize what their goals are, and their goals have to be met in order to reach our goals. And you sit down and you look at your variety mix and what the harvest windows are and what adjustments you're going to make in those harvest windows to get it done. And, you know, frankly, sometimes we're picking a little ahead of where we ought to be in gala season in order to finish before we're too late. And we forego color picking or leave fruit in the orchard that we probably economically should have gotten back. So I think it goes back to what we talk about at River Ridge, and that is be an employer of choice and being competitive in all respects that people are talking about up here in terms of productivity and the ability for people to make as much money as possible and structure. This isn't universal, but I think it's fairly common in our part of the world. We pay into the season bonuses for people who stay through, and I think there's, as Jerry alluded to, there's a concerted effort to make sure that you've got a certain amount of labor need all the way through the season, so that you've got a certain level of production of labor available to you all the way through, and they're comfortable and they know that you're going to have the ability to deliver what they need, which is to make a certain amount of money every day. And along with that, I think there's a real need to understand the culture of the people that you're working with, or have people who work for you who do. And there's just those respect things that don't cost a whole lot, but they're indicative of what kind of employer you are. And in some cases, that goes out the window when we're getting all hung up on the pennies and we end up foregoing the dollars. And, you know, some of those things are little things that, you know, as you said, people walk away from a great place to work and everything for reasons that it looks greater on the other side, but you know, it's even the little things like the housing you have and how, you know, I mean, frankly, what does it cost to air condition units and so forth if you're in an area that it's really warm, or Mike, who was up here on the last panel, talked, I overheard him yesterday say something to the effect that, you know, it was little things like they'd show them out in the orchard when they shut their machine down to take a break, it was completely dark out. So they brought work lights in and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, it's just those things that should be a natural part of the way we do business.
So part of our job as growers, farmers, entrepreneurs is to evaluate systems, figure out what they're going to be, make sure they're going to work, and implement them. And whether it's Jerry's tractor and bin trailer with ladders, or whether it ends up being platforms, or it doesn't matter what it is, it's important for us to analyze them. And one thing keeps looming up in the back of my mind as I look at this, and some of the history of early time motion studies was that they sent people out to analyze what people were doing to see if they could make them more efficient. Well, every time they introduced the observer into the system, the people did a better and a better job. And the more scrutiny you gave them, and the more attaboys, try this, it's going to work, the better and better and better the people, the faster they worked. Of course, then when you left them on their own for 3 weeks, productivity went back to where it was before, more or less. So as we look at systems and try to make decisions, how do we factor in this type of system? I say that because I had a platform out this last year, and my guys were suckering and thinning on it. I've never seen my guys work so fast in their whole life. And I'm not sure that they could do it continually and still be alive. So that made me think of this. So how do we factor these things in as we bring in platforms? But as we bring anything into our system, you know, when it's new and exciting, it's one thing, but we're going to spend huge amounts of capital after you prove what you think is the first system. We're going to spend a lot of money spinning it up 8 or 10 or 12 times, whether it's platforms or whether it's bin trailers or whatever. As soon as we think it works, we're going to buy a bunch more of them. So we're the guys in analyzing this. How do we factor all this in?
Well, one thing that we always did when we did use platforms and bin trailers, etc., is always use incentive-based pay. Don't pay by the hour. So that right there is just a very easy way to reward those employees that are going above and beyond and working fast. So I try to evaluate each of my different ranches by how many dollars of labor per acre are done by hours and how many are done by piece rate. And, and I kind of have my criteria of where it needs to be. And so that's it's a good way to evaluate a foreman. It's a really good way to evaluate a ranch. It's really a good way to evaluate your management style. If half of your dollars is by the hour, you're leaving a lot of efficiencies on the table.
Either one of the other two want to?
Yeah, Jerry, that's a great point. I think the other issue here is it's not always, I mean, I think it's said by a lot of people, but it's not always prudent to be the first one in, but certainly you want to be the last one in. But if you're on the leading edge, you've got to be a bit cautious in terms of what you see, because time is kind of a great leveler, and sometimes it takes a little while to let all those things sort out. We do somewhat similar to what Jerry's talking about, in that each row we've got a tree count and so forth, and whether it's painting trunks or tying tree training and so forth, it's a piece rate, and it works great for the employee, works great for the employer. So it gives you a better tool to evaluate than picking a particular point in time and making those judgments. And the spotlight's on, and I mean, just on the harvester, we saw the same things. We had lots of people who would, it's the middle of the night, you've got lights all over the place, and we're on somewhat of a main road in the Fruit Ridge area and in a couple of orchards, so people would see us out there and they'd stop in. And it seemed to me like the harvest crew really enjoyed the fact that everybody's paying attention, and they were really kicking butt and getting it done. And about midnight, I suspect it wasn't fatigue that set in. It was because I'd stop out sometimes at midnight, and just lack of paying as much attention.
You can answer that if you want, John, but do you have something on that topic?
Yeah, it's important to evaluate the technology you're doing, or whatever you're doing. You got to look at each block on an individual basis if you're looking at your orchard. And everything you do all in a one big lump, there could be something you're really subsidizing over here that would actually be better maybe as dirt and not doing what you're doing. Then just when you look at your blocks on an individual basis. When we did the picking machine for about 2 years, we ran separate lot numbers so that we could compare the fruit quality that it was picking as compared to what our regular pickers were doing, and base our evaluation. Do we purchase this machine even though we're finding more bruising on it? Does the economics of everything that comes with it outlay that? And it's the same way if you're implementing a platform. And you get into a struggle with groups working. I agree 100%. You got to pay piece rates. They would rather work piece rates. When you try to pay up by the hour, they'll actually leave sometimes, especially if you're harvesting. But when you're working in groups like that and you try to do a piece rate, you can run into some legal issues when you have 5, 6 people working together of paying a piece rate like that. So you just have to evaluate those things. And I've done it. I looked at when we planted bench grass this last year. Was it cheaper to do it with a machine, or was it cheaper to do it by hand? And I evaluated it and looked at it and said, okay. And, I worked with each of the crews on dialing in their speed. But evaluating each one of those things, and does it work? If it does, I continue with it.
And the winner was?
And the winner was the man won. The man always won. And, it's the economics of what we're blessed here in the U.S. with a great workforce, the Hispanic workforce. If we had to depend on Americans to do what they do, we'd be in big trouble. We would be looking at doing a lot of the things they do in Italy. And it just depends on your workforce. And we've got great people that they're hardworking people. They want to make good money, and their drive is there. And that really makes a lot of our opportunities really great in this country, because it's so close too.
One other area that we need to kind of jump to, and it's not a big jump, but people have asked me about technology in the United States. And I tell them that our advantage is that we have infrastructure, deep infrastructure and access to technology. And that gives us an advantage because we can adapt things quickly. So I'm going to ask in just a second what things we should be adapting to our farms. And I have one example that's the easiest example. Communication has always been a big problem on our farm. And we have a whole fleet of radios that we use. But now I can talk to any one of my pickers because every one of them carries a cell phone. And I never could have anticipated that the communication was going to change that quickly and that I wasn't going to have to invest a lot of capital to do it. So that's like the easy example here of infrastructure aiding our operations. What other things would you hope for, or what other areas should we strive? Labor's driven us into mechanization for harvest, but what other areas should we strive to bring mechanization or automation to our organizations?
One of the things we've done is barcode scanning with our employees, because we've ran into several situations where we've had employees making fake employees. When you've got different groups working during harvest, you got large groups of people, you don't know every single person out there. And so we've ran into that situation. I know other companies have, and through the barcode scanning eliminates some of those potential issues of scamming you, basically. And they can get, on some cherry pickers are getting $700 to $800 a week or more. It adds up really quick. And so there's a piece of technology that I know a lot of farmers have had a tough time with barcode scanning, and it's taken us 10 years to get our guys comfortable with it. And we just started a new system a couple of years ago. But it helps with cost, evaluating what you're doing, and also less of that temptation for them to have fake employees out there. That's one thing that we've been doing that's been helpful for us. And I think it's helpful for a lot of growers. They're just scared that it won't work out in the orchards, and it does. It's really easy. We all got, you can download barcode scanners on your phone.
We just recently, this harvest season, went to a similar type of system, and it also kind of downstream allows you to judge what you got coming in on a particular day in relationship to what you thought you were going to do, and so forth. But just looking down the road, and this seems a bit pie in the sky, but I'm not so sure that it is. When we just saw the gentleman from New Zealand talking about harvest technology that they're developing, the bin dog or whatever it was that operates without a physical operator. That's entirely possible that they will be doing that in terms of spraying in the future, and I think we'll be doing some prescriptive spraying as opposed to whole tree spraying that we're currently doing. I think a number of those things are going to come into play, and some of it driven by the ability to determine what volume of fruit you picked out of a particular GPS coordinate, and that the things that have come into row crop culture are going to come into tree fruit production, I think, as we go along here. And very likely it'll happen as fast as that cell phone technology. Like I said, when I think about the cell phones,
I always wonder,
30 years old.
I always wonder in the middle of the night how many rows my sprayer guy skipped when he went back out and started spraying again. And that's a perfect GPS application. Jerry, anything on the...
Well, an example is, we can all have fancy water, soil moisture probes, but even though you implement that technology, nothing's going to replace an auger and your hand. And if you just rely on technology from your office to tell you when you should be irrigating and when you shouldn't, you have mistakes happen. So technology is great. You need to implement it, but you have to have yourself, or if you don't have the time to do that, you're going to have trained employees that will carry a soil auger in the back of their pickup and actually use it, 5 times a week. So some of those things, will we ever throw away the soil auger? I hope not, because that soil auger makes you a lot of money, or inversely costs you a lot of money if you don't use it. I think one that I've been implementing that is good is the whole fertility management and the technology of taking fruit samples and seeing what's inside the fruit, when it's 1.5 inches in diameter. That's maybe not a new technology, but pinpointing the type of fertility you need in your soil based on your unique situation, I think, is pretty important. So that's the technology we can all start to implement right away, and it's directly related to fruit quality.
I was going to add one thing that, I shared with you when we were discussing this, that being able to sort fruit out in the orchard before it comes in, I think is a very valuable asset to the industry of being able for a warehouse or a sales desk to know what's coming into it, what's sitting in all those CA rooms, instead of, oh, we got a bunch of teens and quarts in here. They kind of know by looking at it, but if there's an able on the picking technology able to evaluate those things, and so they have a list in front of them and they can actually pack the way they should pack instead of opening up the door, and you're kind of committed to packing whatever's in those bins, that you can market better that way, knowing what you have coming in. So I really think there's a big value for doing that on these harvesting machines out in the orchard, moving our packing lines almost out to the orchard. And also eliminating, if you can eliminate, say, 10% of your coals, to drive a truck all the way from Royal City down to Wapata, what that costs. And when it drives through the facility and gets drenched and then loaded and then put into a CA room for 4 or 5 months, adds up. And so if you take that 10% of stuff that should never go across the packing line, that just pays off that picking machine probably in less than a year.
I don't know about you guys, but my dance card's all filled up, and I don't have oftentimes enough time in my day to evaluate all the new things that I might think I might want to use on the farm. How do you guys delegate this to other people? Because this is like, you don't know if it's going to work or not. So how much time do you want the rest of your staff to spend figuring out whether something's going to work for you in your operation?
Well, it's kind of a loaded question, but I think how I want to approach that is go back to 2 industry leaders. I remember when I first started farming, Grady Abel told me many times when I would see him, he would say, don't worry about what you spend growing a tree. Grow the tree as fast as you can. Cost is not a factor. And so when you talk about budgets and all that, that comment is, don't worry about what it costs. Grow the tree as fast as you can and fill the space. So you don't worry about the costs. You don't worry about if you have to implement a technology to get the tree to grow, do it. Cost is not a factor. Another person, Fred Plath, always used to tell me, he said, production will cover a lot of your mistakes and always be in the top 10% of the pool, and you'll never have to worry about anything. So are there uses of technology to accomplish those 2 things? Well, there might be. But if you implement those 2 comments, you'll be a successful fruit farmer.
I think that's a good spot to stop. Any questions for these guys? If there's no burning question, they'll be up front here a little bit. You can ask them personally. Thanks a lot. Karen, do you have anything for the group?
Today, you had lots of choices on where you're